Okay, well, welcome everyone. How many of you know the very best laid plans don't always work out? Believe it or not, we've done multiple dry runs and it worked perfectly. And we've been here for an hour and a half. And so, for those who are trying to get on Facebook, we could not make it work. It worked great 3 times yesterday. This will be recorded, so we will make sure that we send out a link to everyone so you can hear it. We do apologize. For some reason, Facebook absolutely refused it today. We don't know why. So I am so excited because I get to introduce Dr. Kaushal. Those of you who have been involved with the Health and Wellness Club are probably pretty familiar with him because he is our favorite presenter. And you're in for a real rare treat because it's very unusual to find a medical person with such an incredible background, a diverse background. He got his BS at Yale in biochemistry, and his PhD was at MIT, his MD at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Oh my gosh, I could go on and on and on. He has a list a mile long of credentials. But what I really appreciate him the most is for a couple of things I want to share with you. One is his absolute love for his patients and for people. And when you hear him talk, you're going to see how that passion really comes out. Also, in addition to all his credentials, which are always wonderful, his incredibly diverse background. I mean, he had a PhD before he was an MD. So his background and how the body functions is exceptional. And he has done a lot of research and been involved in a lot of research. And of course, because this is the Health and Wellness Club, we love him because he's what I call an alternative physician, but he's very holistic. He really is always looking for the best approach, getting down to what really starts the problems and the issues. So the reason that we decided to put this together was twofold. We've all been kind of trapped in our house for months. And if you're listening to the news, it's pretty depressing and it can be very discouraging. And I thought it would be really great to bring someone who is an expert in this field, somebody we locally know and we really trust, who has a lot of information on, it's going to give you some really interesting things about the COVID-19. But keep in mind, my message for you today is never allow fear to steal your joy. Never. And if we listen enough to all the COVID-19, it's, there were really a lot of fear factor out there. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't take this serious, but he's going to really talk about what do we need to do now and what do we need to do in the future to keep ourselves as healthy and as safe as we possibly can. And there are a lot of things we can do. We have a lot of control over
You can't do that. You can't have
do you? It stops, so that's good. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kaushal, and we're going to put him on and let you hear. We're going to be asking questions afterwards. This will be recorded. We'll make sure you all get a link. And let's get started. Dr. Kaushal.
You'll need to hit your microphone and turn it on, Dr. Kaushal.
Did that work? Did that work?
Yep.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, Linda, thank you so much for hosting me, and Carl for your IT work as well. I always enjoyed talking with Linda, and a couple months ago we were chatting. I was supposed to give a in-person talk about talking in detail about personalized medicine, and of course COVID-19 turned us all sideways, and that got canceled / postponed. And then Linda and I were talking, and she was telling me about possibly doing something off Zoom. And I said, sure, why not? I said, why not let's talk about COVID-19 itself? Because it's obviously it's timely. it's a very fascinating field, if you ask me, both as a clinician and scientist. As many of you may know, I'm a retina specialist and I'm also a biochemist and molecular biologist. And I've been absolutely fascinated with the biology of COVID-19, as well as the epidemiology, natural history. I mean, we could, when I was talking to Linda, I was asking her, well, geez, how long would you like me to talk about this subject? Because we can literally go for hours upon hours, because it's just simply amazingly interesting. It's unfortunate from the clinical side, of course, with the rising number of deaths. As of earlier today, there was 98,600 plus Americans who died, and that's just we as a society should not be in any way thinking we're doing a good job. And I'm not a political person, but this is not a way a pandemic should be handled. I'm going to start first, and that's about as close, by the way, to a political statement I may ever make in my entire life. But let me first tell everybody a little bit about the Spanish flu, okay? The reason why is that pandemic was also caused by a coronavirus. There was the thinking that this was started in Spain. No, that's not what happened. It was Spanish reporters who really highlighted this story in the United States. Patient zero, if you talk to the molecular biologists, it was really from Toronto, and it spread to the US and it took off like wildfire in the United States in 1918. In the springtime, just about the same time COVID-19 hit us here. By the way, it's called COVID-19, not because it's the 19th version. It's because it started in 2019. Excuse me, if you listen on the news or various people speak about it outside of scientific and clinical circles, they're saying it's the 19th version of coronavirus. By the way, there's literally thousands upon thousands of coronaviruses. Many of them reside in our throat. They're often the cause of the common cold, as many of you know. And just as another side bit, before I continue talking about the Spanish flu, what's very fascinating is if you look at the vaccines, as many of you may be receiving flu vaccinations on a yearly basis. In fact, I, as a retina surgeon, in the surgery center and the hospitals where I operate, I'm required by the hospital credentialing committee to get a flu shot every year. All surgeons are, not just myself. And a good 50% of the flu vaccine doesn't work, right? And that's an interesting subject in and of itself. And there's multiple possible reasons, right? First is, and some of you may be aware of this, viruses in general tend to mutate. What that means is that their DNA or RNA, we're going to talk about that in just a bit, it's their genetic information changes with time. And it is such that these viruses have a greater proclivity to mutating, changing their genetic structure. And that's what makes them adaptable to all sorts of organisms, to survive in the organism and or propagate, as the case may be. And as many of you also may be aware, the lay press covers this in extensive detail, maybe perhaps sensationalizing it to some degree, is that these viruses are so-called zoonotic. In other words, they start in the animal kingdom, and then they quote unquote jump to human beings. And the way they jump is by contact of humans with those animals, whatever the case may be. People hear about bats, camels, those are real. These are coronaviruses that were found in those animals and then jump to humans. There's many other types of animals that coronaviruses live in a synergistic way. And then when they jump to humans, they can cause significant disease. So coming back to this story, so the Spanish flu, interestingly, in the spring of 1918, there was a large peak. Then exactly the same public health measures that we are instituting worldwide, not just in the United States, social distancing, wearing face masks. If those of you, you can perhaps Google it now, or even at the end of the talk or discussion, you can see, that's how I learned about it. I read intensively maybe about 2 months ago because I wanted to understand what happened and how was the Spanish flu controlled, right? So, so social distancing, face masking, right? This idea of contact tracing, these concepts have existed for a very long time. So in any case, what happened was there was a precipitous decline, right? And by, if you look at the timeline, I believe it's like June, July, it was essentially in 1918 summer, there was very little deaths in the United States. And then there was a massive peak, maybe 5 to 8x, as I recollect, greater than the spring peak. And that's where the concern is of the clinicians and scientists. You know, yet some of them are on the news, right? But if you look in the literature, the medical literature, those people, the scholars, both the scientists and clinicians who are publishing papers in this area, this is their very, very big concern. And that's on one side. The other side is, you know, we as Americans tremendously enjoy our freedom, and we're not really following the dictates of the CDC with the US opening up over the last 2 to 3 weeks. Really, social distancing is to basically reduce the chance of infectivity so that we reduce the number of people who die. When you divide that by the total number of people who are COVID-19 positive, that's called the case fatality rate. We want to reduce that. And that number is reducing remarkably. There are some published reports suggesting that it's somewhere around 0.6 to 0.5. It started at 3 to 4, right? And so you may be asking, well, geez, what happened? Well, what happened was social distancing happened across the planet, right? And there are many countries, by the way. I was reviewing for this presentation today. I was looking at this data over the weekend, or perhaps 2 weekends ago, or actually both weekends. There are certain countries where they've had a peak, and the number of new coronavirus cases, COVID-19 cases in those countries is exactly 0. So it's worth repeating. The number of new coronavirus cases in those 30-odd countries, I believe, is exactly 0 over the last 2 weeks. And what did they do? They were very rigorous about social distancing, masks, sanitation. We'll talk about all of that in just a moment as well. You know, disinfecting, washing hands, surfaces, and so on and so forth. But then coming back to the Spanish flu, after that peak in the fall, which is what we're very concerned about here in the US now. And the reality is, we haven't even really decreased in a very profound way across the country. Like certain parts, we're blessed in North Central Florida, from Villages, Ocala, where I live in Gainesville. This swath of Florida, the number of COVID-19 patients has decreased rather precipitously, and the hospitals in the area have very few COVID-19 patients in the ICU, which is that's a really nice thing. Now, South Florida, as you may know, is quite a hot mess, right? Where it's highly populated, and you feel really badly for those physicians and the people who live there, the number of COVID-19 patients and those in the ICU and so on. So we have to drive this number down, right? In other words, the number of COVID-19 positive patients, we got to decrease that number as a society. And the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about is what we can do for ourselves biochemically to really make that happen, okay? Now, just to finish the rest of the story, this Spanish flu had that large peak in the fall. It diminished, again, rather precipitously by about December time. And then in 1919 spring, there was another small peak. And then after that, it essentially dissipated. Dissipated is the wrong word. It still exists. That virus, by the way, there is some evidence to suggest that it's similar to COVID-19. So these coronaviruses have been around for a very long time, a remarkably long time. And the idea that, that there's, excuse me, something new about this virus, we'll talk about that too. There is, and why it tends to be much more, has such a profound disease state. In other words, the disease that it causes in us as human beings. We're going to talk about those risk factors and what we can do to mitigate against those risk factors. Now, so that's a little bit of history. I mean, we could talk about the history of this. It's just absolutely fascinating about coronaviruses, their biology. For some of you who may be familiar, viruses are composed of, as I mentioned, genetic material. It can be DNA, and in other instances, it can be RNA. And the coronavirus, or COVID-19, right? The technical name is SARS-CoV-2, is a RNA virus, okay? So I don't want to talk too much about the molecular biology because it's even though very interesting and it gives us insights into potential therapeutics. It's a more complicated story, and perhaps we could have another conversation about that. But in any case, this virus is composed of RNA, a genetic material. You can think of it as complementary to DNA. And there are multiple proteins on the surface of it. Now, all of us are familiar with this beautiful CDC drawing. It's fascinating, by the way, that red drawing that you see with the spokes. The reason why it's called corona is because it looks like the setting or the rising sun. So corona means sun, right? From Latin, as I recollect. So the coronavirus has this spike protein. Those are the little protuberances from the surface. And what is at the surface? At the surface are a set of proteins. There's an M protein, there's a E protein. There are other proteins found on the surface of the virus, and there are phospholipids, right? These are fatty materials that protect the interior of our own cells, and in this case of the virus itself. Now, what's fascinating about viruses is if you put a virus or a set of viruses, if you put them on, let's say, your kitchen table, right? They themselves have no quote unquote life of their own. In other words, they're not going to do anything. They'll persist there, as many of you are aware from the CDC studies and from our government. They can persist there for an extended period of time, but they can't cause any disease or affect a person while they're sitting on the surface. How they affect us is, let's say you put your hand through a batch of that virus that's on, let's say, your kitchen table, and then you touch your face or you touch your mouth, right? Or you rub the edges of your lips, for example, then the virus has a chance to enter into the human organism. And when it does that, it can attach itself to various cells in the body. It can affect the immune cells, and it can affect they're called the type 2 pneumocytes that are found in the lung. Now, you don't need to remember that. I mean, we all understand that, or have heard now sufficiently, that COVID-19 causes a viral pneumonia. And that's a very, very important point to discuss just briefly. Now, before I do that, here's what I want to tell you about. We've all heard about these predisposing risk factors: diabetes, obesity, smokers, COPD, cancer patients who have a more difficult course with a COVID-19 infection. And so you have to ask yourself, well, geez, what is it that predisposes these people to have more severe disease? Well, it turns out as some of you have attended the annual meeting that we run called Reversal of Chronic Diseases, and many of you heard me in Linda's club and in other places in the villages talk about the commonality, right, of these chronic disorders. All of these that I'm mentioning at this point, which predispose to a more severe course with COVID-19. All of them at their foundation have a profound inflammation, right? And this inflammation theme runs through all of the COVID-19 literature, both basic research and clinical literature. And we're going to talk about that some more. That inflammation, that chronic inflammation, predisposes, for example, the person who's obese or diabetic or has COPD or has asthma or has Alzheimer's, right? Or who has high blood pressure, right? Or cancer, to have a more severe course of a COVID-19 infection. So that's what appears to be the theme or the biochemical theme, that all of these people with different types of clinical predispositions, the ones I just mentioned, you know, obesity, diabetes, COPD, Alzheimer's, so on and so forth, hypertension, and cancer. These folks have inflammation, and the viral infection causes on top of that a profound inflammation, the so-called cytokine storm. Some of you may have even, I've seen it every now and then in the lay literature on Google or on the news. But so you have baseline inflammation with these chronic disorders. Now you add a more acute inflammatory process, the viral pneumonia, right, that occurs with COVID-19. And now you've exacerbated, the body is just simply overwhelmed with this amount of inflammation. And so what can we do for that? You've heard me talk about this as well. And I don't mean to say that I'm the only one talking about this. There's many just brilliant clinicians and scientists who are making discoveries frankly it seems like almost a daily basis. One of the things where it's starting to be appreciated in these COVID-19 patients who have more severe disease versus those who recover is it's quite remarkable. Some of you may not be surprised at all, and others may, is that their nutritional status is compromised. For example, there was a study that came out just recently. Patients with COVID-19 have extremely low vitamin D levels, right? Those are who are in the ICU, for example. And so there are ways we can modulate our immune system. And that's what I'm going to spend time talking about now. And the idea is not, so you may hear also in the lay press and elsewhere about boosting the immune system. We don't want to boost the immune system, because if you have a hyperactive immune system, that also is a problem, because that causes tremendous inflammation and causes immune dysregulation in and of itself. What we want to do is optimize our immune system. So in other words, when we're presented, let's say with a virus, right? In this case, COVID-19, or bacteria for that matter, that our body responds in an appropriate fashion so that it can not only contain and kill the virus or the bacteria, as the case may be, or reduce it sufficiently that it basically gets washed out of the body, right? Either through sweating it out, right, peeing, pooping, as the case may be. Now, what can we do for this? So just to review again, it is clear that these patients who have these pre-existing conditions have an inflammatory baseline elevation. In other words, they have more inflammation in their bodies. And we know that from all these remarkable studies over the last 40, 50, 60 years, demonstrating nearly every chronic disease has significant inflammation associated with it. So now you have a COVID-19 infection, and that increases the amount of inflammation even more dramatically. And literally, it overwhelms the body, right? So what happens is, if the infection, for example, starts in the lung, right, it can cause such a profound inflammation. It can lead, as some of you may have read, it can cause a heart attack, right? It can cause liver failure, kidney failure, and so on. So multi-organ system failure. And it's because of this profound inflammatory response that's occurring. So what can we do? And this is the thing. I was talking to Linda, and I actually, today, even in clinic, I was in the Villages. Our Villages clinic is on Tuesday, and I spend time obviously examining patients, and I talk to them about things that can do to optimize their overall health, and then we talk about what they can do to optimize their immune system, right? What surprises me, I should say, or continues to surprise me, is why this isn't talked about more in detail. Now, part of it is a lot of these approaches really don't require much to do. You don't even have to buy anything. And I'll tell you about a couple of them right now, right? And others, the supplements, they're basically, compared to a pharmaceutical agent, they're pennies on the dollar. And there's really very significant research around those. Very good clinical evidence. Some has already been accumulated for COVID-19 itself. And I'll preempt myself by telling you about vitamin C has been shown to be quite effective at killing almost every virus. By the way, before the polio vaccine, the drug of choice, or sorry, the treatment of choice for killing the polio virus, right? This is published from the Columbia University School of Medicine. Wonderful study, was vitamin C, high dose vitamin C. So vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A has also been shown quite effective against viral illnesses in general. But let's talk about simple things first that can be done. First, exercise. It can't be overestimated, the importance of exercise. Exercise has a profound influence on the body. One of the amazing things that, among many amazing things that exercise does, is it decreases total body inflammation within just a few hours after finishing exercise. During the exercise itself, there's inflammation, but afterwards, there's a profound anti-inflammatory response. That's often why patients who may have aches and pains and bones and joints and so on and so forth often feel better after exercising, because the body produces its own anti-inflammatory agents. Exercise also profoundly increases blood flow. Blood flow is extremely important for the functioning of the body because it not only captures the metabolic waste and delivers it to the various organs that remove that waste, including the liver, the kidneys, of course, and the gut. But things like, for example, I know some of you have seen this, improving microcirculation, for example, with the Beamer. I don't have any financial interest with the Beamer, but I know quite a bit about that German technology. It improves its microcirculation, and that actually helps the immune system itself. So that's on one side. So exercise is one thing. Second, sleep. People have actually studied this. Sleeping 7 to 9 hours a day, if you can do it, right, improves that part of the immune system, the natural killer cells that kill viruses. And many of you, we already, in some sense, we intuitively know that. When we get a cold, the sort of common garden variety cold, if you sleep, you feel better. Well, the reason why is that part of the immune system that kills the virus gets upregulated, right? And it's very easy to do, right? Just sleep, right? Now, it's sometimes easy to say that, and some of us have sleep disorders and other things, but as much as you can try to regularize your sleep schedule, the better it is for your body. Third, this was actually studied, there's a series of published papers in the Japanese studies, going out for a walk where there are trees, okay? Now it sounds very old school, right? Or it almost sounds too good to be true. Well, they actually studied it. So trees produce this aromatic compound called alpha-pinene. Alpha-pinene, interestingly, turns on that part of the immune system, again, that kills viruses, right? So those people who go for regular walks in wooded areas, it's been studied, have less viral pneumonias like the common cold and so on, which is, as I shared with you before, is a type of coronavirus, or one variant of a coronavirus. So there's a couple of things. Another, this was actually studied at the time of the Spanish flu. I don't know why it got lost in the medical literature, and it's reemerging again, is hydrotherapy. So some of you may be familiar with this because I think I talked about it one time when Linda invited me to speak to all of you, or at least a set of you who may be listening. So in Finland, by the way, if you look on Worldometer, that's a place where you can look at to see by country, you know, the testing, the number of people who are COVID-19 positive, the number of new patients, the number of folks who currently have it, and so on and so forth. Finland is pretty low, right? And so why is that? Yes, there is social distancing and so on and so forth. But scientists and clinicians also focused in on the fact that the Finnish people go to the sauna at least 3 to 4 times a week, right? What does the sauna do? So how do they do the sauna? So it's usually for a half hour, right? And then it's followed by a dip in really cold water, right? So amazingly, so people have studied this. So the Finnish people in general, by the way, have very low rates of chronic disorders in general. And it's believed in part because they reduce their inflammatory status, right? The amount of inflammation in their body quite significantly. And interestingly, again, going from hot to cold and hot to cold again, it turns on that part of the immune system, these natural killer cells that kill viruses, among other microbes. So how do you do that, right? Most of us don't have a Finnish sauna sitting in our backyard, right? Well, you can do it in the shower, right? Turn your shower really hot, about as hot as you can possibly bear it, right? So I started doing this myself about 2.5 months ago, right? And then I experimented with this first. Then I turned it to cold. I mean, just flat out cold water. The first day, first week, I could maybe tolerate it no more than 20 seconds, right? And then I just turned off the shower, right? And got ready to go to surgery or to clinic. Then over time, what I found was I could tolerate it better. So I would switch back and forth. So you can take a really hot shower, as hot as you can possibly tolerate for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, cold for a minute, back to hot, 3-4 minutes, back to cold, and perhaps do it 3-4 times. That turns on the immune system, again, that helps deal with viral infections, right? And so I won't, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a diversion, but it'd be a longer conversation. Dr. Kellogg of, Kellogg cornflakes fame, right, developed quote unquote hydrotherapy, what I've been describing to all of you, in part to treat patients for the Spanish flu, among other disorders as well. So it worked, and there are people in the country here now. I haven't had it. I wish I had a little bit more time. I'd like to reach out to those folks who appear to be leaders in this area and understand it more. But what I've shared with you is basic scientists and clinicians who've actually rigorously tested what this does. So just to summarize, a couple simple things: sleep, exercise. How much exercise? 30 minutes, even walking after dinner, in the morning, whatever the case may be, right? The idea of using hydrotherapy, right? Or heat, or alternating heat and cold really is the right way to do it. And then walking in the woods. Now in the villages, or perhaps where some of you are located, there are some areas that are wooded, or you can find a place close enough by that's not particularly populated. And you can go for a nice walk there. We're blessed where we live in Gainesville. We live in the northwest part of Gainesville. There's more trees and deer than there are human beings where we live. So in our neighborhood, there's just basically all trees except for the 20-25 homes in our neighborhood. So we go for a walk many times in the evening, go for a 2-3 mile walk, and you can smell right from the waft from the trees. So those are 3-4 easy, simple things to do. Now, let me tell you, so that you can consider that in some ways foundational, right? What else is foundational? And many of you who have heard me speak before or have seen me in clinic, I talk about the importance of blood sugar regulation. That's really important with a viral infection. It is clear that those people, even who are not diabetic, but who have high glycemic food intake, have a blunted immune response. That this is well known. So regulating the amount of simple carbohydrates you consume in general, right, for the management of chronic diseases, and also for reducing the chance of developing COVID-19, or minimizing the chance of it having a greater effect, perhaps that's a better way to say it, is something that we all should consider, right? Now, as far as sanitizing, I think that's a topic that most of us are extremely familiar with, right? Their washing hands is extremely important, right? Why is it? What does soap do, right? Or what does Lysol do, right? Or Pine Sol for that matter, or Clorox, right? What did they do? Remember, coming back to the virus structure, remember I told you it had a lipid coat or layer on the outside? That lipid coat is dissolved by things like Lysol, right? Bleach, soap for sure. So why, you've heard it perhaps on television. I remember in early parts of the pandemic, almost every night there would be 2-3 folks who would be talking about, sing happy birthday twice, right? While you're washing your hands. So the reason for the length of time is because that's how long it takes really to dissolve the fatty lipid structure on the outside of the coronavirus. And that basically you essentially dissolve the virus away. So it can't do anything. It can't cause an infection. The other thing soap does, and these other compounds as well, Lysol, Pine Sol, bleach, what it does is to any of the proteins, including that spike protein some of you may have heard of, that's on the surface of coronavirus, is all of these agents cause proteins to lose their proper structure, right? In other words, the protein becomes more random in its amino acid sequence, so it doesn't really have a structure, because it's the structure of the protein that dictates its function, right? So basically, it's not only dissolving the lipids or the lipid membrane, as it were, around coronavirus, but it's also denaturing, that's the term, the scientific term, denaturing the proteins. So basically you've rendered the virus ineffectual. It can't do anything. It can't infect anything, right? In fact, if you throw bleach on any virus, literally within seconds, you will basically cause it to be rendered ineffective or unable to infect any cell, okay? Now, I know I have perhaps about 10 minutes, and then Linda said she'd like me to take questions. Let me tell you other things that you can do, and then some of you, as I said, who've come to see me in clinic over the last 2 months, we give a little handout. It's very, very brief. But let's start with the inflammation piece. The inflammation, remember I was telling you there's often a baseline inflammation, and then the viral infection causes even a more profound inflammation. How to actually control that inflammation? And some of you I know already know the answer, but I'll share it anyway. There's many different ways actually, right? And I've shared a couple already. Exercise, for example, is one great way of doing it. But there are certain supplements that are very effective. Let me give you a couple that you can jot down. One is turmeric, right? That Indian yellow spice. Turmeric is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent, and it turns out the mechanism of action, in other words, the biochemical mode of action of turmeric interferes with the major pathway that COVID-19 stimulates in the lungs and in other tissues to cause this massive cytokine storm or this inflammatory process. It actually interacts in 2 different ways. I said major pathway, there's actually 2 pathways. I won't talk about that in detail. For those who want to know more about the details, I'm happy to chat about that separately, the biochemical details. But so turmeric, resveratrol, right? Resveratrol is also actually quite effective at reducing this tremendous inflammatory response that occurs. The active ingredient in green tea, right? So these have been studied, by the way, right? And what else, right? So those are at least a set. There are other methods of reducing this inflammation. In other words, see, what we want to do is, and maybe this is a conceptual framework that may be easier to remember, is if we consider our inflammatory status, let's say here, the average American person around the world, really, we want to reduce it so that even if you did get a COVID-19 infection, the overall inflammatory response would be, let's say, to here. But if you're already here, then the inflammation goes, you can't even see my hand, right? So profoundly that it leads to not only adult respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, and multi-organ failure, right? That's the ultimate. That's why these patients often get intubated, right? First of all, they have fluid in their lungs, right? And then their other organs are starting to fail as well, as a consequence of this profound inflammatory response. There are some, I would be remiss without saying this, there are certain pharmaceutical agents that also profoundly reduce inflammation in the body. Though the reason why they're not used widely is the potential side effects of those pharmaceutical agents. These natural agents, there's essentially no side effects, or at least none that's been reported in the literature. Okay, so I've talked about reducing inflammation. What else can we do? And I alluded to this earlier. I mentioned vitamins A, C, and D, right? So vitamin A, turns out you can take a dose. Now, if I wouldn't want any of you to go out tomorrow and start taking high dose vitamin A to minimize a COVID-19 infection. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a moderate dose of vitamin A, which is actually very safe and has been studied. In fact, the combination of vitamin A and vitamin D had been published in the 40s and 50s to be extremely effective for the common cold, which is now we know it as coronavirus. At that point, they didn't. It was extremely effective. 88% of people recovered within 2 to 3 days, right? So vitamin A, vitamin D. Now, I've talked about vitamin D3, which is the active form of vitamin D, many times in the past. But here's, again, I mentioned this early on. These patients who have severe COVID-19 disease are D3 deficient. But even more telling is that 80% of Americans are D3 deficient. I would encourage all of you who are listening, if you can get to a lab or your doctor, get a D3 level checked, right? And you want to supplement with D3. What I tell my own patients, even those who don't, or who haven't been checked more recently, is to take approximately 5,000 international units of D3. That's a safe dose. You can take even larger doses, but that's what I recommend for patients who may not know their D3 levels to begin with. As I said, 80% of Americans are deficient, and that D3 has amazing properties on the immune system. There are multiple published clinical trials. I think there was 25, if I remember correctly. This was about 6-7 weeks ago when I was reviewing that literature, demonstrating that D3 can limit and or even in some instances prevent viral pneumonias, similar to COVID-19. Now, has it been directly tested in COVID-19? No, not yet. But it seems to me that given how safe it is and how effective it is for regular viral infection, or sort of the garden variety of cold viral pneumonia, that it would be, it's not unreasonable to consider it in patients or in all of us who may wish to try to reduce the chance of getting COVID-19 infection / viral pneumonia related to it. Now, so vitamin C. Vitamin C is a very fascinating topic in and of itself. We could literally talk about vitamin C for hours, but here's the bottom line. Humans only have 4 of the 5 enzymes to make vitamin C. So in other words, we don't make any vitamin C at all. And in any chronic disorder and acute disorder, there's a tremendous consumption by our bodies of vitamin C. So we basically deplete our vitamin C stores. It's an antioxidant. It has many other properties on the immune system. There is clear evidence, at least what we see emerging in the published medical literature, of using high-dose vitamin C IV, anywhere from 25 to 50 grams a day IV in COVID-19 patients to control their disease, the severe disease. But given the that most of us are blessed not being COVID-19 positive, what I tell my own patients, and we do as everything I'm sharing with all of you, we do as a family, 4 grams of vitamin C every day. Now, some of you say, well, geez, that's a lot. And that's the first, my patients who haven't heard me talk about vitamin C in the past, they'll say, geez, that's a lot. Actually, it's not. If you go back, it's fascinating. In those animals that make their own vitamin C, and then you calculate on a per weight basis, so those animals, if you take the average human, let's say 150 to 170 pounds, that person, if you scale up from the animal, right, would be making 25 grams of vitamin C a day. So you have to ask yourself, right, why is it that a lot of animals don't have a cold, right? I was kidding with some patients today. And that's because they produce their own vitamin C in massive doses, right? As I mentioned to you before, earlier on, vitamin C is actually quite effective at actually reducing the amount of a virus in the body. I mean, all the viruses that I've seen that have been studied in the lab, vitamin C at high doses kills all of them. It's pretty remarkable. And again, vitamin C is very safe. The only side effect is some people get bloating and perhaps diarrhea from it. So I'll tell you my own routine. I usually take anywhere from 2 to 4 grams first thing in the morning because I'm so busy all day long. And then in the evening, I'll probably take another gram or 2 or 3, depending on what I feel like. And I tell patients Emergen-C, which I have no stock in the company, by the way, is now restocked in most grocery stores and Walgreens and Walmart, at least here in Gainesville. I'm not sure how the Village is and elsewhere in the country it is. We bought it actually from Amazon not too long ago, and it looked like there was plenty available. So you can take 4 packs of packets of Emergen-C, mix it in water. That's 4 grams of vitamin C. Okay, others, and I know I'm starting to run out of time. Zinc. My patients tell me zinc, you can't find it anywhere right now. That's interesting because here in Gainesville, when I go to the grocery stores or to the drugstores on the weekends, I see it there. Why is zinc important? Well, it turns out zinc is very effective in killing viruses. And the issue with zinc is it's got to get into the cell, right? And because it has a charge on it. It has a charge on its surface, and it has to penetrate the cell membrane, that lipid layer that I mentioned before. And so how can you make that happen, right? Well, there's a natural compound called quercetin, which actually makes a tunnel for zinc to enter the cell. And once it enters a cell that has COVID-19 or any coronavirus for that matter, it can block and completely stop its replication, and the virus stops right then and there. This has been demonstrated. It's actually a 2014 paper originally. Obviously, COVID-19 wasn't described at that time, but SARS and MERS were described, which are similar viruses to COVID-19. So zinc, I already mentioned quercetin as well. And then selenium. Selenium it's effective for the immune system, and it also helps deal with the viral pneumonia that is caused by COVID-19. There are many others, but the evidence in the literature for these appear quite strong. And I will tell you, it's fascinating. I have friends around the country who are anesthesiologists, intensivists, and so on, who are working in ICUs. And it's, again, very interesting to me. You don't hear about it on television or in the newspaper per se, or on Google. But if you talk to them, right, guess what they're taking, right? They're not taking hydroxychloroquine. I can share that with you, right? What they are taking is these supplements. And they're doing these other natural things that I mentioned to you, right? Now, someone might make the argument, and it would be a fair argument. Well, geez, you know, you're telling us all this, but show us the direct evidence for COVID-19. And I would have to submit that the direct evidence for all of these doesn't exist at this time. But given our collective knowledge about the way a viral infection works, right? Whether it's COVID-19 or others, right? Yes, COVID-19 has some peculiar biochemical and clinical features, but the heart of the biology is very similar to other types of coronaviruses, right? There is some variation, absolutely there is. But the theme that I hope I might leave you with at this point is that COVID-19 is a coronavirus. Why is it different from a regular cold is because, first of all, it's incredibly infective. In other words, one person can spread it to multiple people all at once versus a regular cold, which is less infective. That's one. The second, it appears, at least at this time, earlier, let's say in March, you know, that case fatality rate was quite high across the world, but it's declining because it's turning out there's a lot of asymptomatic people, right? And people who recover, right? And I would tell you, just as my own anecdotal observation, along with other physician friends of mine across the country, our sense is, and now there's science to support this, is COVID-19 was in the United States probably in November, December time, January as well. We all were comparing notes not too long ago. I call up a set of my very close friends and we chat on my drive home from the villages to Gainesville, or our Inverness office to Gainesville. And this past winter seemed like there was a lot of folks with very severe colds, with hacking coughs. I remember in the surgery center where I operated, in clinic. And I can tell you, my suspicion is there was a lot of people who probably had COVID-19 and recovered. So in a sense, that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing, right? But we still, as I said, we can do those things that I've mentioned, or at least outlined here. Some of them cost nothing, right, to do. And then some are a set of supplements that can have a fairly significant effect. I shouldn't say fairly, a very profound effect on inflammation and our immune system. So Linda and Carl, I'm going to stop right. I've already, oh my gosh, it's already 7:56. I thought I was just wrapping up. I'm going to stop here. I hope this folks found this useful. Like I said, we could keep talking hours on end about all sorts of interesting aspects of not only the clinical disease, but the basic biology, and also even other therapeutics that are being developed.
I could listen to you a long time. I enjoy listening to you as well. Do you want to take some questions?
Sure. Let me, I kind of minimize my screen a little bit so I don't have to stare at my face in a large format.
I'm going to.
There we go. There we
took
go.
you off the spotlight.
Okay, there we go.
Now we can.
I hope that was helpful for people, Linda
I
and
have two
Carl.
questions.
Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, okay. So my first question is, of course, I do use a Beamer, you know, medical device, and for microcirculation. And you had said something really interesting about why the blood flow is so important.
Yes.
Can you just expand on that? And then the second question is, I know that you have developed a supplement that has a lot of these ingredients in it.
Yes.
You could tell us a little bit about that, because to buy them all separately, to be very honest, is pretty costly.
It is. And so in full transparency for all of those listening, Linda wanted to mention this at the end. All these supplements that I've mentioned to you, or at least a set of those, you know, we ourselves literally we bought them individually. I know the manufacturer, so we were fortunate enough to get it even when there was a fairly significant shortage in the United States. Now they're mostly back, right? But it's still a lot of pills. And as Linda pointed out, it can be expensive. So we actually formulated, and I was telling Linda, we literally just got it. We've named it immunostasis, and it basically has vitamin A at the clinical doses, vitamin C, vitamin D, selenium, and copper in it, and zinc. See, when you take zinc, you can become copper deficient because copper absorption is reduced by the presence of zinc. So we've, as our first pass, it's basically you take 2 capsules, you can take them first thing in the morning, and you have everything, all of the major supplements. We're coming up with a secondary supplement as well that has the other items that I mentioned. But right now, this is, we feel that this is an excellent base foundation. Prior to this, we were literally taking our regular supplements and then another handful to deal with a potential viral infection like COVID-19. Coming to the question, Linda, blood flow. Blood flow is, so it's another very fascinating topic. And I didn't talk about it in detail, and some of you who may be listening may be aware of this already. These patients with COVID-19, besides this profound inflammatory response, what they're seeing also, especially, you know, we've seen or heard in the news, it's a little bit, unfortunately, over-sensationalized, is you hear about young people dying of heart attacks, right? So-called, you know, healthy young folks. And what they're seeing is that there's a coagulopathy. In other words, there's clotting of blood. There's another interesting biology around that as well that appears to be occurring. And anything that improves overall blood flow reduces the chance of clotting. We know that, right? Athletes, you know, who regularly exercise. Now you hear of some athletes who die of a, you know, massive heart attack. That's different. That's because they had a structural problem in their heart. But anything that will improve blood flow, exercise, use of a beamer, that hot shower that I was mentioning as well, right? That improvement in blood flow reduces the chance of getting a clot, right? So the other thing is, for example, taking omega-3 fats in conjunction with these other techniques like the beamer. Taking fish oil, omega-3 fats, reduces the viscosity of blood. In other words, it makes the blood slightly thinner. And some of you who may be on a blood thinner, your cardiologist or internist may say, geez, you know, you probably shouldn't take a omega-3 fat like fish oil, or what we recommend to patients really is cod liver oil. And what I would share is you can take a little bit of omega-3 fat to make the blood less viscous, right? But at the same time, work with your internist, cardiologist, primary care doctor, and reduce the blood thinner like Coumadin or Plavix for that matter, right? So that's the reason why blood flow is important. Improving blood flow.
So how can we get the supplement? Is that something that's available for us?
So yeah, I normally don't like to talk about this, but we literally just got it, and we have it in our clinic, in our village's clinic. In fact, that's the only place where we have it. And so you can call our clinic. We're going to have it up on our website as well, just shortly, perhaps today or tomorrow. And folks are welcome to take it. As I said, it basically has those major supplements that I've talked about, where there's really excellent evidence to support their use for any type of viral illness. I would say another thing, totally separate from this, is that COVID-19 it's not the case that it's going to be here as long as the planet exists, right? In humans. And in this current situation that we have worldwide, the pandemic, right? It's going to persist. What I've read, and I stand to be corrected, what I've read from the academic scholars is it's going to be around at least for 2 years at a minimum, right? And so again, the things that I've mentioned, those are simple things we can do to help protect our bodies. And as I said, and I like to use the word optimize our immune system, not boost. Boosting can create other issues, as I mentioned. So you want to optimize the immune system so it's working in the appropriate fashion. And in part, optimizing it is reducing the inflammation as well.
Are you okay with us posting your number on our health and wellness Facebook page?
Sure. Happy to.
Okay.
Yeah, not a
Okay,
problem.
thanks.
I'll write. I'm in the midst of writing up, Linda. I started about a month ago, writing something up for patients in general, right, about COVID-19 and the ways to optimize the immune system. And then what happens is I work on it on the weekend, and I go down a rabbit hole reading the literature, and by the time I spend 6-7 hours reading that literature, I go, oh my God, I've only written a paragraph more. But I do want to finish it. I had about 2.5 pages. I was going to make it a roughly 5 pages, and I'm happy to share it with all the folks.
That would be great.
And,
Thank you.
and share it with all your friends and family as well, because I think it's so important that this type of information get out there. Like I said, I'm puzzled why the major media outlets on Google you can find it if you kind of know what you're looking for. You can find almost all this information, but why it's not covered more extensively, because there's really, as I mentioned, outstanding clinicians and scientists who've been working in this area 40, 50, 60 years, right? Most of their careers, right? And yet you never see interviews from these folks. And I kind of chuckle at it. It's like, geez, why is this? I mean, obviously there's a tremendous focus on the vaccine and potential new drugs. Yeah, they're going to be very, very useful. I mean, the results with remdesivir are very exciting, the Gilead drug. But I can imagine that, again, you would want to use that in conjunction with other ways. You see, that's directly attacking the virus. But you want to do things to actually, again, optimize our immune systems.
I have a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
The first one from Kylie, you mentioned the copper, and she's asking, what's the importance of copper?
Oh, that's what I was mentioning. See, when you take zinc, copper absorption can be reduced. And so you can become copper deficient.
Okay.
So you want to take a little bit, many zinc preparations already have copper in it, right? So you want to have a little bit of copper in the zinc preparation so that you don't become copper deficient. And copper is important for the whole body and the brain in particular.
Okay, I have another question in the chat. It says, it's from Christopher.
Yes.
Could you comment on the role of nitric oxide in the COVID-19 disease?
I just saw that.
You have the chat, so you can look at them too.
Yeah, I just opened it up. I didn't realize I could open it up. Yeah, so that's a wonderful question that Christopher's asking. And the role of nitric oxide in COVID-19 disease, absolutely. There's evidence to suggest that there is endothelial dysfunction. Just to review for those who may not be familiar with it. In our blood vessels, the lining of our blood vessels, there is a set of cells called the endothelial cells. Those endothelial cells are critical for the health of our vasculature, right? Remember we're talking about blood flow and things like, for example, microcirculation improvement with the device that Linda's very familiar with, the Beamer, is very effective in improving the functioning of those endothelial cells that produce nitric oxide. And by producing nitric oxide, that vasodilates the blood vessels. In other words, the blood vessels get larger, easier for blood to flow through them. And it's anti-inflammatory in and of itself, right? The production of nitric oxide has that effect. And it prevents, interestingly, blood clotting, right? So this is the exercise will also help with nitric oxide production. I will tell you, even though we didn't talk about it here, my family and I, we actually take a supplement that I helped design with a cardiologist friend of mine out in California that actually boosts nitric oxide production in the body. We take it after every workout, like when we go for a long walk or so on. So absolutely, yes. Anything to improve endothelial dysfunction by improving nitric oxide production is very, very good. And this comment by Christopher Davis is very insightful and correct.
There's someone who's raised their hand. I am going to unmute Eloise. You are unmuted. If you can turn your microphone on, you can ask a question.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay, question. I'm one of those folks that cannot take vitamin C.
Yeah,
It reacts with my body.
sure.
So I will back off and let you address that. Is there an alternative to what you're recommending?
Yeah, when you say your body, it reacts to your body, do you get diarrhea from it?
No, I get fever blisters if
Got it.
I can even do orange juice and my lips blow up like balloons.
Isn't that interesting? So there's an extremely small set of people like yourself where vitamin C can do that, right? Obviously, you can't take vitamin C as a capsule per se, or if you did, you can take a smaller, in other words, you can actually open up a capsule and pour it out into, let's say, a glass and mix it up with some water and just sip it. You can't even do that.
No.
How about when you eat an orange, by the way?
Oh God, that's like detrimental.
Okay, so in your case, you shouldn't take it at all, right? Obviously. Right. Were you G6PD tested at some point?
No, I was not.
Yeah, that's a genetic test. I would consider getting that done for yourself, okay?
Okay.
Just so that you know, right? In your instance, obviously vitamin C is not such a good idea, but it's a very rare person who has that type of reaction to vitamin C. So in its absence, I would take the others, right?
Right.
And those natural things that the non-cost, that don't cost you anything, right? The sleep, the exercise, the hot and cold shower, believe it or not, very, very effective. Can I tell you something? It sounds goofy to say this, right? I actually look forward to that hot and cold shower in the morning now. My body's gotten used to it, right? So doing those things, going out for a walk in the woods, right? Or as wooded a place as you can find, right? And then taking the other supplements for sure. The D3, the vitamin A, zinc, and so on.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And there's another text question there about taking zinc sublingually.
That's a great question. So the question is for those who may not see it, is it best to take zinc sublingually? You can take zinc, so in other words, a zinc lozenge, right? So we have both zinc at home. Well, now we have our supplement, right? But we had before that zinc itself, right? And we even had zinc lozenges, right? Zinc lozenges are not bad at all, right? You have to, suck on them, right? And the zinc actually goes down our throat, right? And many times with a regular cold, it will enter those cells on the lining of our throat and kill off those viruses. So the answer is yes, you can take a zinc lozenge or sublingual, or you can take it as a capsule as well.
I'm guessing there may be people on here who don't know how to raise their hand. So can I take a minute just to point that out again? And I'm going to share let's play this. Okay, so let me get through a couple of these here. When you go to the participants, and we'll go further. You can ask your questions here in the chat if you click on the Q. Also, first of all, if you bring your mouse across the screen, then the controls on the bottom will show up. To actually raise your hand, if you go to the participants and the little bubble with the 3 dots on the lower right, if you click on that, you'll get an option that you can raise your hand, and then I can see that your hand is raised and turn your mic on for you. And let me get through these so I can end my screen share. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I hope so.
Okay, there's a couple other questions. Christopher Davis, what are your thoughts of glutathione supplementation? That's another wonderful question. Glutathione is an antioxidant, but it has a very short half-life in our bloodstream, on the order of minutes. So better than the glutathione is N-acetylcysteine, another natural antioxidant as a supplement, and taking anywhere from 500 to a gram 3 times a day. And as I was telling you, some of my anesthesia and intensivist friends across the country, they're taking that as well, right? Because obviously they're directly exposed to COVID-19 patients in the ICU. So yeah, So better than, so to answer Christopher's question, I would say better than glutathione is to take N-acetylcysteine.
Okay, we have a question from Diane DeVoe. I just, here, let me unmute Diane. Come on. Why is it not unmuting? Okay, I think it's up to you, Diane, to try to unmute yourself. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. What I wanted to know was the spelling again of the combined supplement.
We've nicknamed it or call it immunostasis. IMMUNO stasis. STASIS.
SIS.
Yes.
Okay. And how would we be able to get that?
So you can call our clinic, and we'll have it up on our website, but you can call our clinic 352
Yes.
775-1010.
Okay. 775-1010. Is
Yes.
that the clinic?
Yes, it's our village's office, but the phone rings in all of our offices, so wherever our staff is, they'll answer.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So there's a question, are you accepting new patients? Yes, we see new patients all the time. Today we were, it's kind of interesting. I have to share this with all of you. Over the last 2-3 months, so soon as COVID-19 became a serious problem in the US and in Florida, what we did was all our patients who had 6-month or year follow-ups that were coming up in March and April, we pushed all of those patients out. So our staff was busy calling people. So our clinic volume, or the number of patients we saw in clinic, went down for perhaps 20-30%. But what happened on the flip side was the number of new patients that were seen for emergent retina problems, retinal surgeries. So the number of surgeries, interestingly, and I've talked to some of my other retina colleagues around the country, they experienced the same thing. The number of surgeries we did increased. So obviously cataract surgery wasn't being done because that's considered a non-essential surgery, but retinal surgery is considered vision threatening. So that went up. And so we've been seeing a lot of patients who have very significant retinal issues during this COVID-19 time. And so yes, we are seeing new patients all the time.
All right, I have let me unmute Ron. Can you turn your microphone on? Oh. Are you there, Ron?
Oh, yes. I wanted to know about echinacea.
Yeah, echinacea is also useful. Like I said, I didn't go through every, if I started going through all of the supplements, again, we would be here for hours. I talked about the major ones which had the most compelling science around them. But echinacea is also useful, right? For any type of viral illness, right? So you can take echinacea. I don't remember the dose off the top of my head. But yes, there are some very nice clinical studies to support its use.
But is that something you would take every day, or you take it?
Yeah. So a lot of these, remember I was mentioning very early on that many of us as Americans are nutritionally deprived, as it were, or deficient, maybe a better word. So what we really want to do is obviously optimize our metabolic status. And by optimizing your metabolic status, you're going to optimize your immune status as well. So yes, I would consider taking that if you are going to take it regularly, every day.
Thank you.
Carl, I got to tell you, I love your backdrop.
That's here in the Villages. It's I love it. It's one of my favorite places in the Villages. Let me lower the hand here. I think that might be all the questions.
Okay.
Here's another one down there. You've got on the chat, there's a question.
That is a very interesting question from John Riley. Hypochlorous acid killed a virus. I don't know the answer to that, but here's what I can tell you. Hypochlorous acid is produced by our white blood cells, and it typically kills bacteria, right? Now, the way it does it is the same way as remember some of these other compounds that we talked about, you know, Clorox, Lysol, soap, right? Hand sanitizer, which is basically alcohol, right? Ethyl alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. And so hypochlorous acid, I would imagine that it can kill the virus too, but I don't know the studies directly. That's something I'd want to look up. That sounds really, really interesting, because we use in ophthalmology, we use hypochlorous acid spray on patients, not to put in their mouth, right? But on their spray on their eyelids to help reduce the bacterial load on the edges of the eyelashes for patients with dry eyes, right? So, and that's to kill bacteria for sure. But I suspect it does, but I'm gonna look that up after this.
You see the other questions there?
Yes, there's how much selenium? It's 200 micrograms a day is the studies I've seen.
And there's a question on guava leaf tea.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it sounds like it's more of a statement. It says, we have been studying guava leaf tea. PubMed has some recent studies with COVID-19.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes. That also sounds like an anti-inflammatory effect, although I'd want to look up those particular studies. I haven't read those studies, but I'd look those up afterwards.
Okay, anybody have any more questions? I think we can wrap this up if we don't.
Well, wonderful. I really appreciate the opportunity, Linda and Carl, to hopefully educate, create some awareness, and help people with, again, not only optimizing their metabolism, but also optimizing their immune system.
Yeah, well, I love listening to you. You have some great information, and I appreciate you being here.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate your time. You are so busy, 7 days a week.
Yeah, I told you, Linda, we celebrated Memorial Day with 8 surgeries.
Yeah, right. With no
It's all good.
picnic in
It's all
between.
good. It's a blessing to help people.
Well, thank you everybody for showing up. I'm recording this and I will put it on Facebook as soon as I can. I tried to live stream it for people, but I had technical difficulty and couldn't do it. So thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Have a
Have a
wonderful
great
evening.
Bye.